pretty damn sharp. All right. There's been a lot to talk these days about the big issue of the moment, climate change. I want to tell you about what was by far the worst climate disaster to hit Northern Europe and Shetland in particular in recorded history. I have never been comfortable with the notion that the Vikings either wiped out Shetland's Pictish population or so totally absorbed them into Norse culture that nothing of Pictish culture survived, not even place names. In this paper, I offer a third, and I believe more plausible explanation, that is, catastrophic and long-lasting climate change eradicated Shetland's Picts. So, Fimbulwinter, myth, folk, or folk memory. Fimbulwinter is said to be 3 successive winters, when snow comes in from all directions without any intervening summer. This is a very precise statement and more likely to be a description of real events rather than a myth. Over the last 2 decades or so, more and more research has been done into past climates, and very sophisticated climate models have been devised. Evidence from ice cores, sea sediments, and tree rings have been fed into sophisticated climate models and led scientists to conclude that catastrophic climate change was triggered by a long sequence of volcanic eruptions beginning in AD 536. This brought on the most severe and longest lasting climate downturn in the last 2,500 years. Known as the Late Antique Little Ice Age, its devastating effects continued to affect Scandinavia, the British Isles, and the rest of Europe from the mid-6th century right through the 7th century. Researchers and climate modelers conclude that Fimbulwinter equates to Late Antique Little Ice Age. And I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to say Fimbulwinter than to say Late Antique Little Ice Age. So I'm going to call it Fimbulwinter from now on. The science. Negative climate forcing. I consider Shetland to be hit by a triple whammy of negative climate forcing events. That is, cyclic reduced total solar irradiance, which was greatly exacerbated by a series of volcanic eruptions that triggered a switch to a prolonged negative North Atlantic oscillation phase, negative NAO. Because we've only got 20 minutes, you're going to have to take the science as read. That is, that the volcanic catastrophic events of 536 were immediate and exceptionally severe and unprecedented. Also, that the knock-on severe cooling of Northern Europe continued for another 150 years. Causes. I want to highlight a change that was very important as far as Shetland was concerned, and that is a switch from positive to negative North Atlantic oscillation. Well, this will have had dramatic effects in Shetland that we'll talk about later. The switch was from mild, wet westerlies to bitter, cold, and dry northeast to westerly winds. Usually a negative phase lasts for a few months, but sometimes will switch back and forth for over a period of a few years. Following the 536 AD eruptions and subsequent growth of sea ice, the negative NAO phase persisted for about 150 years in this case. Should have had a page turner here. Right, the climate forcing triggers and overall effects. Contemporary texts from Europe at this time say that the sun was obscured for 18 months. The Fenrir wolf of Fimbulwinter had swallowed the sun. Summer temperatures dropped by at least 2.5 degrees Celsius below summer normal. This was the beginning of the coldest decade in 2,500 years, in which crops failed, leading to widespread famine and settlement abandonment. And it is estimated that half the population of Scandinavia died. The continuation of famine, deaths, and plague was caused by further eruptions around 541 AD, again at 547, plunging summer temperatures to perhaps as much as 3 degrees below summer normal. There were further eruptions recorded as happening in 574, 626, 682 AD, continuing the cold summers and the negative NAO phase into the 7th century. So, cooling, drought and crops. The figure here on the left is a climate model output showing the effects of volcanic eruptions. What it shows in the top line is the increase in the volcanic load into the atmosphere and reducing sunshine each time there was an eruption. The graph below shows the subsequent drop in normal summer temperatures and rainfall for the Northern Hemisphere and for Scandinavia. The effect of this on crops will be the reduction of the amount of sunshine and temperature required to successfully grow crops such as barley. This is called growing degree days. And reduced rainfall will also reduce the viability of crops in pasture. And one of the consequences of the negative NAO phase is reduction of rainfall. So, vulnerability. We'll start with Greater Pictland. Land quality is a major factor in an agrarian society's vulnerability. It is clear from this that Shetland was by far the most isolated and vulnerable part of Greater Pictland. Historical records show these areas have often been tipped over the edge of sustainability by climate downturn. Between the years 550 and 1800, in what was the Little Ice Age, there were 21 periods of famine in Scotland, often leading to population movement and settlement abandonment. Fimbulwinter was much, much more severe than this. Vulnerability of Shetland. Only about 3% of the land area of Shetland is considered suitable for arable cropping. It was probably much less in 536. Land quality and availability determines the amount of crop production balanced against animal husbandry, particularly for overwintering. The numbers of cattle versus sheep are also determined by land quality. Land quality also determines settlement patterns, so that even a small change in land quality or growing conditions will have a large knock-on effect on crop production and animal husbandry, particularly fodder for overwintering. If you have successive bad harvests, but still require the same amount of grain for replanting, the law of diminishing returns will apply until you have no grain for human consumption over winter. They're pretty dry. Crop failure in Shetland. Catastrophic crop failure would be the result of the first and second climatic whammies I talked about to hit our Pictish communities. Reduced sunshine resulted in cold and dark growing seasons, or as the Fimbulwinter folk memory says, 3 successive winters, when snow comes in from all directions without any intervening summer. No matter how good or bad your land is, if you don't have enough sunshine and rain, the soil never gets warm enough, you won't grow any crops. Figure A on the left shows growing degree days for normal seasons in Baltistan, with a critical level summer temperature given a surplus of 50 growing degree days, you could grow barley. Figure B shows the effect of a drop of just 2 degrees in normal summer temperatures on barley growing degree days. This will bring a massive drop of 450 growing degree days, giving a deficit of 400 growing degree days. So barley crop cannot be grown. Similarly with pasture, a 2 degree drop will greatly reduce pasture. However, these graphs don't consider lack of rainfall, which would make the situation even worse, probably pushing pasture below critical level. Then we look at fishing. Most of the time, we enjoy a positive, negative Atlantic oscillation phase, which brings nutrient-rich waters to Shetland and the North Sea, which you see in the top slide. The onset of a negative NAO will drive nutrient-rich upwelling currents away from Shetland waters, resulting in a decline of fish abundance, size and species. The AD53 switch to a negative NAO that lasted for 150 years would have been absolutely catastrophic for Shetland. The last buildings at Old Scatness, occupied by Picts in the mid-6th century, contain relatively few fish bones, and those which are present are typically from small gaddies. This is a clear indication of fish scarcity from the onset of negative NAO. If your harvests fail and you are in famine crisis, where do you go? The seashore is your first alternative. Limpets have been termed as famine food. But clearly this is not a sustainable source, and you have also to look to fishing efforts. But if your fishing efforts fail, what do? We shall look at a possible alternative later. We'll have a quick look at communications. Shetland's contact with Orkney and Greater Pictland would have been tenuous, at least at best, restricted to good years and favourable summer weather, and operated by those in the community with skills to make long sea journeys. With the onset of strong and prevailing eastern or easterly winds for years brought by the negative NAO, communications would break down and be lost, especially if those with the skills succumb to the famine. There is evidence of extremely high storm surges affecting Shetland in the 6th century. One has been linked to a tsunami and its effect. This may well have swept away what boats were available to coastal communities. In any event, the sea link with Greater Pictland would have been severed permanently. The lower slide there is the sand layers from the storm surges at the head of Bastavo, and the top one is mid-6th century, and it was tsunami-like in its effect. Well, maybe a little bit earlier than Fimbulwinter. We'll look at 100 years or so before Fimbulwinter came in 536. So even before the catastrophic volcanic eruptions from 536 and later, the climate had been on a gradual downturn for about a century. Settlements on poor agricultural land had already been abandoned. Good examples being Kebbister near Lerwick and here at the Tafts of Bayan. The White House is the croft where I grew up, and the Taft settlement is circled in red. The land just above the settlement is now agriculturally poor, boggy, and just fit for rough grazing. The fields to the right and up towards the houses on the skyline is just as bad. Wet me feet in many a day. Excavations here and at other sites show an occupation change from large round houses to wheel houses to small cellular structures before abandonment. So was the change from large to small buildings the response to failing agriculture and reducing population due to climate change? I think so, because the same human response was found to have occurred during the 6th century at Old Scatness. At Yarlshof and here at Old Scatness, the same pattern of building change is repeated, progressing from large buildings for extended families to tiny subterranean hovels for just a few individuals. As the climate deteriorated, we see a change from round houses to wheel houses, including one inside the broch, which again was later converted to small cells accessed by tunnel-like passage into the broch. Not shown here, but a small figure-of-8 cellular building was built on the edge of the area, giving a mid-6th century date. So the pattern of response seems to be, as agriculture failed and food supply declined, population fell, and building style changed to cope with this and the deteriorating climate. Eventually, settlements at Old Scatness and Yarlshof were abandoned when population fell below sustainable level or were wiped out by famine. During the preparation of my paper, Steve Jennings gave a talk on the remarkable series of cellular partly subterranean buildings identified on 5 sites in North Ray. I agree that these hovel-like dwellings are almost certainly Pictish. But why build them away from agricultural land or shoreline resources in a harsh, barren, almost Arctic-like inland landscape 100 metres above sea level? The only reason I can think of that this was to utilise the last remaining food supply by a desperate, starving population that loch trout and seasonal runs with salmon and sea trout for the burn up to the lochs. I think that very soon this food supply too would fail to sustain the very last Pictish inhabitants of Shetland. I'll do a summary. Well before the 536 AD outpourings, the populations of Shetland were already reacting to climate downturns, indicated by a change in dwellings from large round houses and wheel houses to small hovels, then abandoning progressively poorer land. AD 536 eruptions began in March, when Shetland's agrarian communities were at their most vulnerable after winter and before seasonal planting. The effects of 536 eruptions were immediate and unrelenting. This was the beginning of the coldest 2 decades in the last 2,500 years. No cereal would grow for human food or fodder for overwintering animals. Conditions would become ideal for contamination of stored grain in souterrains by poisonous ergot. Pasture would become severely reduced or non-existent. Cattle and other livestock would be wiped out as they either starved or were killed off for food. Access to raw materials for clothing would end. A wakened, starving population would find working peat for fuel to heat their miserable hovels difficult or near impossible. The only fallback food resources were in the seashore, freshwater lochs and burns, and seasonal bird life. These resources would soon become depleted and eventually fall below sustainable level. So prolonged and bitter was the climate downturn that eventually there was no survivors. Contact was permanently severed with Greater Pictland, which itself was severely impacted, and knowledge of Shetland's existence there ended. I could give you a quick summary, a quick postscript, I should say. Adam's Life of St Columba regards Orkney as the furthest reaches of his known world. indicating that all knowledge of Shetland had been lost before the arrival of the first pioneer monks from Ireland and Scotland. The population of Shetland began with Irish Pictish monks that were later named Papar by the Norse traders and Viking raiders. Papar settlements in Yell, Arnst, Fettler, Papastour, Burra and Bressa were capable of cereal production with access to pasture. The scattered and independent nature of these 6 sites suggests that they were there to support isolated hermitages of the first post-Fimbulwinter settlers in Shetland. Old Scatness has evidence of transient reuse of some of these long abandoned Pictish buildings by Norse and Viking visitors. Shetland was an obvious staging post for traders and raiders from the late 8th century Viking raids on Irish coasts until the mid-9th century settlers put down roots here. Egil's saga tells us that in the time of King Harald Fairhair, many men fled from Norway and settled in many deserted places, including Shetland. The tiny Papar settlements of Shetland survived and grew during the Viking Age, showing that a symbiotic relationship of mutual benefit existed during that time. Thank you.
I don't have any slides or what's his name to show here. I'm afraid I'm not up into the 21st century. This is what happens to you when you study classics and Celtic. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I can read this, Jesus. I'm going to put the position regarding these names. They're going to appear in 3 parts. One is the name Tula. I'm not going to discuss any what do you call it, stories regarding any of this. There's Tula, and there are 3 names that were recorded by Pliny round about the same time, which are relevant. Then we look at the essentials of Tula, in other words, what was recorded by the person that discovered this place, namely Pytheas, a Greek explorer, around about 325 BC. And then the third part is the association of the name Tula with Shetland. Okay? Now, although the tradition has it that the island of Tula was discovered by the Greek explorer and geographer Pytheas of Massalia, that's Marseille, in around about 325 BC, nevertheless, Tula has for some time been thought of by many authors as a British island. And this is important here. This is a part of the thing that relates to Shetland. But in the last analysis, regarded as referring neither to Norway nor to Shetland, and latterly to Iceland. The irony of the matter is that, so far as we are aware, no one after Pytheas formally ventured out to follow him in his tracks and find out for himself where Tula actually lay. And it is this fact that has seemingly contributed to the magic and mystique over time, even though much has been commented on Tula by classical and medieval authors. They have had in reality nothing else to go on other than that which is believed to have emanated directly or indirectly from Pytheas himself. Pytheas's report eventually was lost. A number of classical and medieval writers have made comment on it, what they actually have seen. One of them is Strabo. Now, I have here, right, a full thing on Ultima Thule, and all the quotes by the classical and medieval authors are incorporated here, along with comment by later scholars on what the situation was. You can have that if you want. I'll leave it here. Now the thing is as noted by Rive and Smith in their place names of Roman Britain, The only definite thing that can be said about Thule is that it was not one of the British Isles, right? That's the only thing that can be said. Now, to go into the name, so far as is known, the title Ultima Thule, furthest out Thule, was first used by Virgil in his Georgica, Book 1, Chapter 30. Tibi serviat ultima Thule, may furthest out Thule serve you. In other words, it became some sort of proverb, tuned in proverb, and soon became a quasi-slogan used by successive authors for an undefined place at the ends of the earth or in unknown northern waters, and thereby engendering a certain amount of mysticism. In Greek it is constantly spelled Thule, and in Latin variously spelled Thule or Thile or Thole. But you find that the Latin mirrors the Greek declension. The island name Thule, with reference to the name Thule itself, no known convincing attempt to seek a possible origin for and the meaning of the name has hitherto been sought. Any suggestion is, of course, a matter of speculation, since we know very little about the circumstances of the discovery apart from the various comments made by later authors. In such circumstances, our choices are severely limited to what is likely to be the case. If Pytheas chose anything at all, it would in all likelihood be a suitable Greek term describing what he had seen. If so, then perhaps Greek Thule, a bulge or a callously or a pad or a cushion, could be offered as already hinted at by Holder in the last century, in the 19th century. Beeks adds, very also Thulos is a bulge, a callosity, a hunch, a nail, or a peg. Well, with regard to its etymology, Beeks adds, because of its vacillating meaning and its short-term form Thule, or Thulos, a genitive, cannot be easily provided with an etymology. Various cognates have been proposed: the Balto-Slavic group, Thulan, many; Lithuanian Thulan, several, rather many; Thulis, a nail on a car, plugged nail or an axle; or Old Norse toller, a tree peg, right? And then it goes back to Sanskrit, Thulan, a plume, a fan, or a bundle. Yet none of these Indo-European words is a close match for Thule in form and meaning, so the word may rather be pre-Greek. And if it is pre-Greek, then it may be Semitic, of Semitic origin. In this regard, if we look at the Semitic origin, suggested is Thule, a hang, that is in Semitic, Thule, a hang in Akkadish, and Thulu in Hebraish. That is to say that the image seen by Pytheas was seemingly of a huge cliff overhang of bulge-shaped dimensions. And a hang is your belly here, and it goes out like that, right? That means that when Pytheas then saw this land, he saw a massive cliff, right, bulging out and coming down like that. A massive cliff we have here what's the big island there, the west of Was? Yeah, Pula, yeah. That huge cliff there, that's a huge cliff, which apparently is the second biggest in Britain. That's the sort of thing he would have seen, but it would have been a bulge. Now, there so happens to be a similar cliff in the Isle of Man. I mean, you're getting tired of the Isle of Man now, don't mention it. But the thing is that this term is Bullagon, right? And Bullagon in Goidelic means a bulge, and this refers to a small cliff on the east side of the Isle of Man, right? If it is the case that pre-Greek Thule is what Pytheas had in mind, then this is likely to refer to a geographical or similar feature of such dimensions as to merit the term he had chosen. This can be no more than a suggestion, but it is the sort of common noun that could very well be applied to a spectacular geographical feature at any time. In other words, a huge bulge. The associated names with all this come from Pliny. In his discussion of the geography of the British Isles, the Roman historian Pliny the Elder, that is Gaius Plinius Secundus, in his Naturalis Historia, book 4, 103 to 104, lists a number of islands and island groups in and around Britain and Ireland. In the context of Ultima Thule, he cites 3 island names from where Thule could be reached. In this short note, we shall first of all discuss a possible origin. Name, Thule itself. Then seek to unravel the nature of the 3 remaining names. Now, the 3 remaining names are Dumna and Bergos or Berike or the Werigon, right? Now, the first one, Dumna, appears in other sources as well, and generally refers to the island of Lewis. Later Celticists have thought, well, it could also refer to the Long Island, right, going right down to Barra Head. However, it is primarily a name that is applied to Lewis, and it is so applied in Ptolemy's Atlas. Bergos and Berike and Werigon are versions of the same word, and Bergos means a mountain, right? And this term is only found in Celtiberian, that is the Celtic language of Spain, or in Gaulish, the Celtic language of Gaul, or the present-day France. It does not appear in either Old Irish or later Celtic languages. Now, what that would mean, or what that would suggest, was that you either had a band of Celtiberians or of Gauls sailing through the Minch, probably in seek of ports to conduct trade, and they would go up there, and they would see on the left-hand side a row of mountains coming down from North Uist, Benbecula, and South Uist, and ending up in Barra, right? So all this would be called Bergos or Werige as a form of identification, right? As a form of identification. Now, I do have here all the details about that scene when if this ever is published. Okay, so we have then the Thule name as a bulge, as a huge bulge. We have the name of the places that you can go to Thule from, namely Dumna or Bergos, that's North Uist, down to Barra Head. Now, the essentials of Thule. What did Pytheas really say? As Pytheas's report has not survived, all we have to go on are accounts of varying accuracy drawn from a number of authors from classical and medieval periods down to the 11th century. Some may suggest that some authors had actually read the report, while others quote from what they had heard or at second, third, or fourth hand. If, however, we sieve the material down to its residuum and note the points that are likely to derive from Pytheas himself, we come to the following results, which may help us decide where Thule in all probability lies. To my mind, the target would need to contain the following ingredients in order to qualify. Partaking in the competition are the most likely venues according to the information available, namely Shetland, Norway including Lofoten, and Iceland. 1. That Thule is the furthest out island north of Britain. Does this reply, the positive is Iceland or Norway, Lofoten, negative Shetland. That in Thule there are 6 months of predominantly continuous day during the summer solstice and 6 months of predominantly continuous nights during the winter solstice, or that the night during the summer solstice lasted only a short time, 2 or 3 hours, and the day during the winter solstice the same or similar length of time. Positive, you find that in Iceland and in Norway and Lofoten. Negative in Shetland. That Thule is 6 days sail north of Britain, 5 days sail from Orkney. Positive, Iceland or Norway. Negative, Shetland. That the frozen sea is 1 day's sail from Thule. That's going to the north of to the northern part of Iceland. Positive, Iceland. Negative, Norway, Lofoten. Negative, Shetland. In Thule there was to be found a strange condition, neither land nor sea nor air, but some sort of substance mixing these elements, resembling the sea lungs or a type of jellyfish, which it was not possible to cross either on foot or by ship. Pytheas saw the foregoing particular condition himself, according to Strabon. Positive, that can only refer to the area of Iceland. Negative, Norway, Lofoten, and Shetland. If our survey is credible, we have the following results. Positive, Iceland 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Norway 1, 2, 3. Shetland none. Right. Okay. Now that's the situation, and this was backed up later by Dicul, one of the people who came from Ireland along with his religious friends and settled in Westman Island, and then the Scandinavians who then came afterwards, right? That's it. It does refer, and the definite comment that is made that it is Iceland appears first in the Adam of Bremen, about 1054.
5 minutes left, George.
What?
5 minutes left.
Right. 5 minutes. Good. Now, the associated of Thule with Shetland. Tacitus says in his Latin that Thule was also surveyed. Their instructions taking them only so far. That's the people that had to go and see it. Besides, winter was approaching. However, they said that the sea was sluggish and heavy to the oar and comparatively torpid even to the wind. I presume because land and mountain, the cause and occasion of storms are fewer and further between, and because the deep mass of uninterrupted water is slower to be set in motion. That seems to me an accurate description of Da Rus. In other words, that they had gone through that. And I suspect that after they had gone through that, they were really at the roundabout Dunrossness or Sunbury Head. The coordinates as used by Ptolemy differ regularly from those used by present-day Ordnance Survey by some 7 degrees for the same area. And as such, there is a common constituency of compactness between the two tables, suggested that Ptolemy, in this regard, at any rate, was in receipt of a large reliable information, probably from Roman sources. And then I give here then Ptolemy's, what's his name, and then the modern conception, and they do refer to Iceland. Now the reason why this is that Thule is so long in existence or associated with Iceland is because it's on Ptolemy's map. Right? Now we come then to the propaganda use of Thule. The story of Ultima Thule is, yes, the Roman Emperor Domitian saw in all this, in other words, the Battle of Mons Graupius, the sailing of the Roman fleet round Britain, and believing that the Romans had then got the whole of Britain right up to the north of Scotland, and to boot, Thule was just over there, and this mysterious island of Thule would add to his propaganda and his esteem under the Roman people. In other words, that the association of Thule with Shetland served a propaganda purpose for the Emperor Domitian. Right. The Roman Emperor Domitian saw all this, i.e. Agricola's activities in Scotland, Battle of Mons Graupius, fleet circumnavigation of Britain, and topping it all this, the mysterious island of Thule, which I've just said, as an opportunity of bringing everything together into the Roman world would serve as a huge propaganda coup for his benefit. For him, that was the whole point of the exercise, irrespective of the truth of the matter. So far as is known, Thule remained associated with Shetland for as long as the Roman Empire existed. Now the thing is that shortly after that, Domitian had problems on the Danube. He had to withdraw one of the 4 Roman legions from Britain, which meant that only 3 legions remained until the end of Roman presence in Britain, which meant that the Romans could only control up to the 4th Clyde line. That means that anything to the north of Clyde line during the rest of the Roman period was not under Roman control. And it was in this area, after the coming of Septimius Severus at the beginning of the 3rd century, and shortly after that, that was when the Picts, this is a conglomerate of various polities in what is now central Scotland, came together under the term Pict. And at the same time, we have a similar situation in southwestern Germany of German polities coming together under the name Alemanni, and then in the area of Frankfurt, German polities coming together under the term Frankie. And all these 3 happened at the same time as a sort of bulwark against Roman power. Okay, that is the position, and that is the position altogether. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm wearing 2 hats today because I'm also the curator responsible for archaeology here in Shetland Museum. So I wanted to welcome you all, and we've had a great couple of days. When I heard I was the last paper, I thought, well, I'll not get nervous because they'll all be in the pub by then. So thank you for putting your beer on hold until I had my paper. This is the title of my PhD, but I want you to have a quick look at the picture of the painting by Stanley Cussiter of St Magnus. He's quite a handsome dude because you'll see him later. The cult of saints played a vital role in medieval society. The saints offered the people a direct link to God. As the cult of saints spread, local communities wanted their own patron saints like Magnus in Orkney, Thorlakr in Iceland, and St Olaf of Norway. The veneration of saints, both national and local, were usually combined and continued over many centuries. A quote by Robert Bartlett sums up the importance of the cult of saints when he writes, "God is great but not easily accessible. Human life is full of dangers. The saints are sown across the land by a loving God to act as the bridge between the desperate human beings and his divine power." Why populations reacted positively to the cult of saints is an important question and is fundamental to fulfilling an aim of my thesis, to gain an understanding of how local communities identified with and responded to the cult of St Magnus. But first we must start our journey in Orkney, where Earl Magnus Erlendsson jointly ruled the earldom of Orkney, Caithness and Shetland from around 1106 with his cousin Hakon Paulson. But in 1114, tensions between the cousins and their followers began to grow. Around 1117, the cousins agreed to meet on the island of Egilsey in Orkney to broker a peace agreement, but Magnus was duped by Hakon, who arrived with 8 warships ready to do battle. It is said that Magnus took solace in a small church that night and was captured in the morning, but to ensure peace for the Orcadians and Shetlanders, Magnus chose death and asked that he not be killed by a sword like a criminal. Hakon, too cowardly to do the deed himself, had his chef, Leifolf, kill Magnus with an axe blow to the head. It is said that Magnus prayed for the souls of those who were about to murder him, and he was buried where he was killed. The sagas tells the area of rocky ground suddenly became luscious and green. His mother Thora pleaded for her son to be given a proper burial within a church, and Hakon granted this, and Magnus's body was translated to Christ Church in Bussey, which is part of the pilgrimage walk that we can still do today. Canonized in 1136, Magnus's nephew Ronald had the cathedral built in Orkney to house his uncle's saintly remains, where he still rests today. It was completed and consecrated in the 1150s, and it's amazing if you ever get the chance to go. During the past 2 years, I've been recording the material legacy of the cult of St Magnus and the veneration in Orkney, Shetland, Caithness, Faroes, Iceland and Trondheim. I'm recording the churches dedicated to him, including surviving church furniture, images and statues of Magnus, and of course his surviving relics. St Magnus's skeletal remains do survive. They were discovered in this wooden box that you can see, which had been secreted into one of the large columns where his shrine stood between. The bones were returned to the column, but the box that held his remains can still be seen today in Orkney Museum. I recently secured permission to have the lid of the box radiocarbon dated and eagerly await the results. Sorry, I cannot tell you that yet. It might be from the 12th century or it might be the 16th century, perhaps during the iconoclasm of the Scottish Reformation. We don't know, but watch this space. But to cut a very long story short, I am recording the Magnus Church dedications, and that the fact that these appear to have been built or furnished with this bright red sandstone from Orkney quarries that you saw the cathedral is built. We have 3 dedications in Orkney, but they are all associated with the translation of his remains from Egglesey to his final resting place within St Magnus Cathedral. Here is the church on Egglesey, which was built after he was murdered, built by Bishop William. And there's only a couple of blocks of red sandstone in this church walls, but there's a lot built into the surrounding walls. And I must say that the red sandstone is not native to Egglesey. We also see red sandstone built, recycled into the St Magnus Church on Bursey. And this church was built in 1664, but it was built on the foundation of an earlier church, most likely from the 11th century, the one where Magnus was taken from Egglesey. But note the lovely 13th century lancet window from the old church, and there was also red sandstone foundations found below. Many other churches around Orkney have been recorded in this study, notably those surviving from the 12th century, such as St Mary's in Wyre. And red sandstone blocks are evident in these churches, again brought into sites where the sandstone is not natural. And it's often, I've noticed, placed in archways and doorways, so important places. So we start our journey now heading north. We'll come to Shetland, where there is at least six St Magnus dedications. But before I discuss this, I want to share with you a small portable altar seen here, which can sit comfortably in my hand. Going back to the Tower churches and the one that was in Egglesey, we had 3 here in Shetland. And we know from parish records and other documents that there were also they were built in St Mary's in Ireland, in Bigton, St Lawrence in Papelborough, and St Magnus, our mother church, in Tingwell. Unfortunately, none of these survive today, but many of the blocks that we were constructed from they do survive as they're recycled in to the churches. This is St Lawrence and Borough, and you can see the bright red sandstone which is recycled into the new church. In a joint project in 2018 with Alan Fraser, who you heard earlier, we had rubble blocks tested from each of the 3 church sites, and they were all proven to be Arcadian in origin. We have the same here in St Mary's in Ireland, although fewer blocks can be found in the stone from the demolished church, as they were used in the houses, which are all so well kept and whitewashed, so we can't see them. But we do have what was thought to be the capstone of the tower, and it was tested and is Arcadian. In Tingwell, we recorded red sandstone window lintels in the gable of the present church, which hardly anybody knows about, to be honest. It was And I think it's a relic from the old church, and I'd be happy if anybody can tell me what you think that writing actually says. And there's also a lovely carved block of red sandstone, which I think is another relic from the Tower Church. While nothing of the Tower Church of St Magnus survives, its crypt did survive, and an arched doorway was opened from the outside in the 1740s, and it was renamed Mitchell's Isle, and now the burial place of the landed gentry from Scalaway. But you can see it's not easy to see because it's covered in lichen, but the back wall is completely made from red sandstone. So why do we think that these three churches were imported, with their imported red sandstone, were associated here in Shetland with the veneration of Magnus? We know from the Orkney saga that Shetlanders were heavily invested in the development and growth of the cult of St Magnus, listed here in the Shetland pilgrims that are recorded in the sagas. These miracle stories were important for the vitae of St Magnus, encouraging his veneration in the community. Ronald would have needed support from the Shetland community to help him gain his family inheritance of the earldom. So he have these three churches built in Shetland with the red sandstone to further the cult as a sort of thank you for the Shetlanders' support. Documents tell us that the tower in St Magnus Church in Tingwall was built of red sandstone, and what a statement in the landscape that must have been. We know it was seen for miles, as the 16th century maritime charts note that the tower is a guide into Scalaway Harbour. Anthropologist and archaeologist Paul Tacon suggests that colour has been used to communicate beliefs and new ideas within past societies, and that it played an important role in expressing and recording change, a means to translate and confirm a new identity. He suggests that a public display of colour creates meaning and significance, and this may be why the Orcadian red sandstone was used in churches in Shetland as a visual marker to the establishment of a new ecclesiastical order under the collaboration of Earl Ronald and Bishop William, and an innovative building type for the period. While doing my research, I was alerted to an incredible find that I feel confirms this link with the cathedral in Orkney. The Piscina here seen in the centre was recovered from the old church at Parpland Borough many years ago and kept safe by the family who found it. I took its measurements and compared it to the two remaining piscinas within the cathedral in Orkney, and you can see how similar they are, the ones at each side in Orkney. And the measurements were within 2 centimetres, suggesting that they were created at the same time, and perhaps even by the same stonemason. This is the link we needed, that our three tower churches was linked with the cathedral in Orkney. We can assume then that St Magnus cult was important here in Shetland and continued to be so, with other Magnus dedications around the Isles. We celebrate St Magnus in the landscape too. We have St Magnus Bay in North Maven. According to documents in the 16th century, that parish was referred to as the St Magnus parish. And also there's a 16th century document that refers to St Magnus Isle, which Barbara Crawford suggests is Papa Stour, an important royal estate in the late 12th century. And an interesting map from 1730 shows a stretch of water in the south mainland called St Magnus Fjord. So I can say that he was a popular saint here in Shetland. And let's now travel further north to the Faroes, where I had a lovely week in the Faroes last summer, and to see how the cult of St Magnus is remembered there. The medieval Bishop's See is in Kirkebur on the island of Streymoy, and described in the Guide to the Faroes Islands as the most important historical site in the archipelago. At the heart of Kirkebur is the ruin of the Gothic-style cathedral thought to be built around 1300 and dedicated to St Magnus. Known locally as the Wall, there has been much discourse over the years as to whether it was finished and consecrated, and if the dedication to Magnus is original or later. Nearby is the parish church of St Olaf, which is still in use, and on the shore is a very ruinous remains of a small chapel known as the Likhus, or corpse house. So let's look at the evidence in the cathedral's association with Magnus. In the eastern gable, you can see that there's a lovely big window in the eastern gable, and if you look to the right of that, you can see this lovely, which is blown up here, an amazing carved steatite tablet, and referred to as the Golden Cabinet, behind which the reliquary houses the relics of the Holy Cross, the Virgin Mary, St Thorlach from Iceland, and St Magnus. The contents of the Golden Cabinet were removed and examined in 1905, and the relics were contained in this small light box seen here, and then they were replaced where they still remain. I visited the Museum of Faroes to record the artefacts relating to Kyrkjabur, and was astonished at the survival of the 16 wooden pewines and 2 lectern panels that are on display in the museum. I mean, the photos cannot possibly do them justice. These incredible carvings were housed in the parish church of St Olaf until they were removed in 1874, but examination by Danish priest Hans Christian Lingby in 1817 concluded that they were not in their original setting. The rounded escutcheon of one panel denotes a coat of arms believed to be that of King Eric of Pomerania and Queen Philippa, which is the only coat of arms known, but is identified as it corresponds to the first royal seal of Scandinavia to be divided into quarters, and the King Eric's Great Seal from 1398. This incredible furniture, which is certainly fit for a cathedral, may have been originally in the cathedral and part of its interior in the late 14th century. We don't know for sure. But further evidence exists and adds weight that St Magnus Cathedral was completed and furnished and can be found, including finely carved consecration crosses, of which 6 are still in the original setting, in the nave, and 2 altar stones survive, and curious carved red tuff bowl, which is now broken in half, which may or may not be a piscina. I don't know if Erling and Erland might be able to help me with that, whether it was, it's not been recorded as ecclesiastical, it may be agricultural, but it could be. And also, sorry if it's kind of dark photography, but it's dark in the museum and you're not allowed to use flash. But this is the bishop's seat. It's a beautifully carved piece of furniture and most likely part of a ciborium altar. And then there's also these incredible wooden statues, also from St Olaf's Church. Jesus at Crucifixion and the Madonna and Child, remarkable survivors, which I believe were originally situated, could have been within St Magnus Cathedral and most likely placed above the rood screen in the eastern end of the chancel. Archaeologist Christian Eliason's 2008 study of the architecture suggests that the cathedral walls short was completed, and looking at the survival of the many aspects of church furniture from Kyrkjabur, I suggest that it was completed and used. Regarding the dedication to St Magnus, we know that his relic survives in the Golden Cabinet, but a surviving miracle story from the 1290s suggests that St Magnus was the patron saint of the cathedral. The Faroese version was collected by the Reverend Schroeder in 1851. The story was collected from a resident of Kyrkjabur in the 19th century, and Schroeder relates the Faroese version. There's also an Icelandic version, where a shipwrecked Icelander who had suffered so badly that he had become insane was taken inside the cathedral by 4 men who held him down until he was sprinkled with holy water in the name of St Magnus. And of course, as all miracle stories, by this miracle he became as tame as a lamb. And St Magnus is still within the psyche of people today. I'm not just looking at times past, but how we still think of him today. I met with local historian John Sigurd Hansen, and he told me that you still say in Faroes that the bright nights start with the Magnus or Masso, or Mass, on his day on the 16th of April, which was on last Tuesday. And then I'm heading now also up to Iceland. I'm going there in 2 weeks' time to do my research. But again, records show that St Magnus was venerated there, and there's some remarkable surviving altar cloths. And you can see he's changed a bit since Stanley Cussiter had him. He was a prominent saint in medieval Iceland following the translation of his relics to Skalholt Cathedral in 1298. And there is evidence of his veneration during the second half of the 13th century, noted in manuscripts of the Gragas in 1260 law books. Magnus was patron of 4 churches in Iceland, the half church at Holt and Thingvellir, and co-patrons at Kolbeinstaðir with St Catherine, again with St Catherine and the Icelandic Saint Thorluk at the half church at Ness, and Sibol Church. The image of St Magnus was also represented in churches in Hof, Husavik, Millefell, Strutestaðir and Svalbard. The feast of St Magnus was adopted as obligatory for Icelanders in 1326. And again, this is another altar cloth from the 1500s, but again, he's quite cartoonish in this one because he's got his scepter in one hand and a sword, which he can amazingly obviously hold just on his thumb. I've presented here today some examples of surviving and incredible material culture associated with our conference's namesake, St Magnus. His cult obviously played an important role in these northern regions, and as I've shown, he is still remembered in our lives today. Magnus is all around us, a truly northern saint. Thank you for listening.